Most of us don't even know that America, for 70 years, has stood for a global economic system in which citizens get no votes. These international rules trump our laws. I discovered this whole thing when Congress repealed the requirement that some meat producers tell us on labels where our meat comes from. They repealed that requirement because requiring more paperwork from foreign meat companies is World Trade Organization illegal. And so we had to change our law or be fined.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, and thank you for clicking on the 186th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And before I get started with this absolutely packed with information episode, I would like to thank everyone who has been buying Congressional Dish merchandise in the new Congressional Dish store. For those that haven't checked it out yet, we do have a bunch of different products now: t-shirts, phone cases, stickers, pillows, reusable bags, all kinds of stuff. And we have a variety of designs, some with the Congressional Dish logo and some with my favorite episode artwork that our darling Brian has designed for us, and even a few options that I just found on TeePublic and I think you guys might like. But I also want to let you know that if there is design that you guys want that isn't on there, like if you want the logo displayed in a different location on a shirt and we haven't provided that combo for you, or if your favorite episode cover art isn't there, email me and Brian and I can make that available for you. But I have noticed the sales, especially on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and I appreciate you supporting the podcast and being the podcast's walking billboards. And for those of you who are unaware that the store exists, it exists! And so check that out on congressionaldish.com if you're doing some holiday shopping for your fellow Congressional Dish fans. But now, let's get to the stuff that makes you a fan of this podcast, that makes you want to buy the t-shirt and the stickers and the reusable bags, and that is the information. And holy shit, do I have a lot of it for you today. Because today's episode is about the National Endowment for Democracy and what they've been up to lately. The National Endowment for Democracy first captured my attention this year when I read the 2018 government funding law, specifically the State Department section. You might remember this from episode 175, State of War. But for those of you who haven't heard that episode yet, that's fine. This episode will fill you in because that information was buried pretty deep in the episode. And the fact that this thing even exists is a scandal, and so it's worth explaining twice. But basically, the National Endowment for Democracy is a private foundation that receives millions of our tax dollars and then hands our money out to groups that work to change the governments of other countries. They call it democracy promotion, but it has all to do with democracy. They've hijacked that word. What I'm pretty sure is going on, and not just with the National Endowment for Democracy, but what our entire foreign policy is currently centered around, is coordinating efforts to remove the governments of countries that don't submit to the rules of the World Trade System, operated by the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. A system in which no ordinary citizens get to vote, and therefore is not a democracy itself. It's an economic system based on allowing freedom, not for individuals, but for markets, freedom for businesses. The ultimate goal of the World Trade System is to give multinational companies the freedom to operate and take resources from every country in the world. And any country that challenges that freedom is an enemy. Now, the United States' role in all this is that our military is the muscle for this effort, to make the World Trade System the economic system for the entire world. And our State Department enacts this system in other ways, coordinating the trade agreements and the propaganda and other sneakier methods of getting other governments to comply. If the State Department fails in their soft power type methods, then the spooks at the CIA move in. And if they fail, shock and awe, full-blown war like what we saw in 2003 in Iraq. And I know that this might sound wacky if you haven't been listening regularly to Congressional Dish, but I can prove it to you. And so if this is your first time listening to Congressional Dish, well, you're in for a doozy of a first episode. But you should probably at least listen to Congressional Dish 102 about the World Trade Organization, during which you will hear the people who created this system tell you exactly what they're trying to do and that they've been trying to do since at least the end of World War II.
The purpose of the world community was to have World Bank, the IMF, and a World Trade Organization.
In terms of this economic New World Order,
you're going to have a change in the leadership of the world
to create a worldwide system.
This economic system, which is based on removing as many barriers as possible to the collection of profit and hoarding of wealth, is meant to be global. And that's the thing. With the advances in technology being what they are, this podcast is a global podcast, for Christ's sake. We do live in a world with so much more interaction and integration, and some global agreed upon rules are probably a good idea. But the problem is that the system being pushed is not democratic, and it requires the endless growth of companies on a planet with limited resources. The system they are pushing and have been pushing for over 70 years is a shit system in which words like democracy and freedom are misused to get confused peasants to passively go along. Because every time they talk about democracy, I can't help but think about their actions, because actions speak so much louder than words. And since the start of its existence after the end of World War II, the leaders of this system have proven time and time again that democracies will be overthrown if they refuse to open their markets to multinationals and change their economic laws. This happened when the CIA overthrew the democratically elected government of Syria in the 1940s in order to build the Trans-Arabian fossil fuel pipeline. This happened in Iran when the democratically elected prime minister was overthrown and replaced by the Shah in 1953, who was a dictator that we supported until the Iranians threw him out on his dictator ass in 1979. This happened in Guatemala in 1954, when the democratically elected President Arbenz was overthrown by the CIA and replaced again with a dictator. This happened in Brazil in the 1960s when the United States starved the elected government of money, paid the opposition, and then after the regime change, legitimized and funded the U.S.-trained military dictator who then let multinationals into the country. This also happened in Indonesia in the 1960s when the president, who had thrown the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund out of the country, was replaced by a military dictator who took over the country by slaughtering approximately 1 million people with the United States' full knowledge and support. But he wasn't a supporter of communism, which is an economic theory that competes with the world trade system. And so this lack of democracy wasn't a fucking problem. Democracy was also thrown aside in Chile in the 1970s, when democratically elected President Salvador Allende, who was in the process of taking some Chilean mining resources away from multinationals, well, he was overthrown with World Trade System assistance and replaced by dictator Augusto Pinochet, another mass murderer, who let multinationals do business in his country, privatized the banks and Social Security, replaced public schools with charter schools, and in return for these wanted reforms, was allowed to rule for decades without a hint of democracy, but plenty of free trade. And of course, more recently, we know that our government overthrew Afghanistan and Iraq, and this podcast has documented the overthrow of Libya's democratically elected government, the overthrow of Ukraine's democratically elected government, and the still in progress overthrow of Syria's democratically elected government. And the National Endowment for Democracy is a player in this game. In this episode, you are going to hear some of the highlights from a hearing that took place in the House Foreign Affairs Committee in June, during which the president of the National Endowment for Democracy was a witness. And this is one of the most overwhelming hearings I've ever watched. It's a fascinating hearing indicating our participation in at least a dozen recent and ongoing regime changes, most of which I was completely unaware of. And perhaps one of the reasons why all these regime change operations came as such a surprise is because this hearing was not aired on C-SPAN, so it was not seen on any American television screens. And as of the day I watched it in late November 2018, it had only 966 views on YouTube. The activities of the National Endowment for Democracy are flying so far under the radar that they might as well be underground. And I'm not going to have all the answers for you today. You'll probably walk away from hearing this episode with a lot of questions, because that's where I'm at. But this is the episode that we'll be able to refer back to every time someone says, "What's the National Endowment for Democracy?" And we'll tackle the overwhelming number of regime changes in progress somehow over the course of however long this podcast is allowed to continue. Because this is just the beginning of the regime change rabbit hole. I had no idea how deep it would be. But Congress, members of Congress in both parties, they are perfectly aware of what the National Endowment for Democracy is up to, along with the other organizations that were represented in this hearing. And it's Congress who determines where our money goes. And based on the way this hearing started, that's good for the National Endowment for Democracy. Here's retiring chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce of Orange County, California.
At home, we must maintain the decades-old bipartisan consensus that democracy is a core element of U.S. foreign policy. That is why it's important to have the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Republican Institute, and the National Democratic Institute here today. And that's why it's important that Congress continues to adequately fund these institutions.
So as you heard, 3 organizations were represented by witnesses at the hearing I'm going to highlight for you today. One, the big one, was the National Endowment for Democracy. And the others are organizations which get our tax money funneled to them by the National Endowment for Democracy. Now, the National Endowment for Democracy was created in 1983, so within my lifetime, by President Ronald Reagan, who was a corporate salesman given the powers of the President of the United States. It was created in order to take over many of the election interference tasks that the CIA was caught doing in the 1970s, which back then were treated like scandals. Basically, the National Endowment for Democracy was created to bring cover to our regime change efforts, because even though it was created by an act of Congress and is funded with our tax money, the National Endowment for Democracy is a private, technically non-governmental organization. This setup allows it to raise money from groups outside the government, so they can take our tax money and private money too. And even the CIA didn't have that much financial freedom. And according to the person who has been the president of the National Endowment for Democracy since the oh-so-appropriate year of 1984, Carl Gershman, he said, quote, "The idea behind making the National Endowment for Democracy private was to remove it from all the entangling diplomatic obligations of the United States," unquote. So it was designed to get around U.S. diplomatic obligations. It is designed to break the promises we've officially made to the world. And Carl Gershman, the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, who admitted that this is the function of his organization, he's the person testifying on behalf of the NED, which is what they call it, in the hearing I'll be highlighting today. But just so you understand who is controlling the National Endowment for Democracy, you need to hear some of the other people who sit on the board of directors, like its chairman, Ndi Card. Ndi Card was George W. Bush's chief of staff during the really psycho years, before either branch of Congress was controlled by the Democrats, and therefore the Republicans were able to do whatever they wanted, much like these last 2 Trump years. Ndi Card was the chief of staff when George W. Bush overthrew the government of Iraq. And so clearly, Ndi Card is a regime changer. And he's the chairman. He's the top dog of the National Endowment for Democracy. Or, I don't know if he's the top dog, but he shares some kind of top dog status with Carl Gershman. Another person currently sitting on the board of directors is Victoria Nuland. And she's the one that longtime listeners will remember as the former Assistant Secretary of State during the Obama years, who was caught on tape planning who would be installed in the new government in Ukraine before that government was overthrown in 2014.
Good. So I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea. I think Yates is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Cleach and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. I just think Cleach going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
And Yatsenyuk, when the coup happened, was in fact the guy put into the Ukrainian government. And if this is news to you, if you don't know what the I'm talking about, I suggest you listen to Congressional Dish 167, Combating Russia. Because Ukraine, we did that. Or at least we were very intimately involved. And I was going to save this for later, but why wait? Here's one of my favorite moments from the hearing. This is recently fired by Orange County, California Representative Dana Rohrabacher in the hearing.
Did we or did we not involve ourselves heavily to undermine the democratically elected government of Yanukovych in Ukraine? And what did it bring us? It brought us turmoil and conflict that if we'd have waited and let that government be elected because of its flaws, unelected, we would not be in this situation today where the world is more likely to go into conflict because of that. I don't believe the Russians would have invaded Ukraine had we not arrogantly involved ourselves to overthrow that democratically elected government in Ukraine.
Damn! I feel kind of vindicated. And shortly after, before Dana Rohrabacher's time was up, because anyone who watches these hearings, we all know that no congressman gives up their time early. But before his time was up, he stopped talking and he said,
So I've had my say. I know I'm making everybody mad at me, but I had to say it.
So the U.S. midwifed a Ukrainian coup. That really happened in 2014. And even sitting members of Congress clearly feel like they're not allowed to talk about it, even in off-television hearings with mostly empty seats. But it happened. And Victoria Nuland, current National Endowment for Democracy board member, she was one of the key players. And she's been doing this a long time because before removing Ukraine's government for Obama, she was Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney in the overthrow Iraq years. And another person on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy who played a key role in the Iraq War regime change is Eliot Abrams. He was in the W. Bush administration from a few months before 9/11 until the very end. And he was a deputy national security advisor specializing in Middle East policy during the W. Bush years when they planned the overthrow of Iraq. And another thing that's super fucking strange about the board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy is this. This is Representative Gregory Meeks speaking to the National Endowment for Democracy President Carl Gerschman.
And Mr. Gershman, I'm a former board member at NED, so I've seen firsthand the work that you and your dedication and the bipartisan board of NED collectively working together to try to make sure that we have a better world for all of us.
Members of Congress are on the board. And right now, the current members of Congress who are currently sitting on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy are Representative Peter Roskam of Illinois, who is a co-chair of the House Republican Israel Caucus, which is a group that works for foreign country Israel inside the U.S. Congress. So perhaps there are some conflicts of interest there. And here's Representative Karen Bass of California during the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to welcome my colleagues from NED and IRI and NDI, and I'm a member of the NED board for my colleagues that are here on the committee. And I have to say the work that NED does around the world is really tremendous.
Representative Karen Bass of California is on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy. And Representative Karen Bass of California is on the committee performing oversight of the National Endowment for Democracy. She's conducting oversight of herself and her coworkers. How the hell is this allowed? Because this allows her to not only shut down any real oversight, but it also allows her to participate in providing tax money to the National Endowment for Democracy. And then she gets to, on the other side of that, accept the money and hand it out to wherever the hell it goes. And we do know where at least half of it goes. Because half the money is handed out to hundreds of groups all over the world. And there are forms, like tax forms that exist that tell us the names of those groups and what amounts they get. But tracking what each of them do with the money, that is a rabbit hole too deep for me. But half of the National Endowment for Democracy money goes to only 4 groups, with each of them getting equal amounts, which by my calculations, based on the 2018 funding, is about $20 million each this year, per year. And that's on top of God only knows how much private money they get. But one of the groups that gets this money is the American Center for International Labor Solidarity, which is an affiliate of the AFL-CIO, which represents union workers. Another one is the Center for International Private Enterprise. This is an affiliate of the Chamber of Commerce, which represents big business, which has this mission statement on its website. They say, quote, "We're strengthening democracy around the globe through private enterprise and market-oriented reform," unquote. So they're not even disguising their intentions to make countries change their laws to have them match the so-called market economic system. They say it right on the website. And then the third and fourth organizations that get $20 million each in tax money every year from the National Endowment for Democracy, plus their private money, are the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute. These are the other two organizations that were called to testify in this hearing. And these two, their existence is a perfect representation of why we all kind of feel like Republicans and Democrats are largely two sides of the same dirty coin. Because these two organizations, as their names suggest, are the Republican and Democratic parties. Both organizations say on their websites that the connection to the parties either doesn't exist or is a, quote, loose affiliation, unquote. But those are lies. Because I checked when I did the State of War episode in June. Every single board member of the International Republican Institute is a member of and or major donor to the Republican Party. And every single board member of the National Democratic Institute is a member of and or a major donor to the Democratic Party. Every single one. And all of this was designed to look like it's completely disconnected from our government. But it's not. Both of these organizations were created at the same exact time as the National Endowment for Democracy. It was created alongside the big business representing organization too. And it was created because the CIA got caught interfering in the elections of other countries, which resulted in rightful public outrage. And so the National Endowment for Democracy, which was created by a Congress made up of members of the Republican and Democratic parties and signed into existence by a Republican president, it was designed to funnel tax money to the highest ranking members of the big two parties and big business so that they could use it to fund regime changes around the world, with the whole operation designed to look private. Like our tax money isn't a part of it at all. And I just have a quick question, baby boomers, because I was 2 when this became law. And my question is, where were you? Did anyone fight this? Did anyone even know about this? How was this allowed to happen? And I guess it doesn't matter now, because this has been a thing for 35 years, and it's clearly unquestioned today. And so let's deal with the present, because here's where we are. Which members of the Republican and Democratic parties are currently in on this scam, you ask? Well, let's start with the Republicans at the International Republican Institute. The International Republican Institute is a private, so-called non-governmental organization that receives our tax money from the National Endowment for Democracy, the State Department, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and private donations from God only knows who. And again, every single person on their board is a member of the Republican Party, even though they claim no affiliation with the party at all. And so, just to show you how unaffiliated with the Republican Party they are, let's take a look at who's on the board of directors, because there have been some big changes since I last discussed this in June. So for 25 years, and up until a month before his death last year, the chairman of the International Republican Institute was former face of the Republican Party, Senator John McCain of Arizona.
For 7 decades, the United States has played a unique role in the world. We've not only put America first, but we've done so by maintaining and advancing a world order that has expanded security, prosperity, and freedom. This has required our alliances, our trade, our diplomacy, our values, but most of all, our military, for when would-be aggressors aspire to threaten world order.
Well, now that he has passed on into wherever we go when we're dead, he's been replaced by current Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska, who everyone knows is a puppet of the multinational fossil fuel industry, not only because of the approximately $500,000 he's taken from people in the oil and gas industry, but also because of his proud love letters to the fossil fuel industry, like this clip from his first speech as a senator on the Senate floor in January 2015. In this clip, during a speech about his support for the Keystone XL pipeline, which would be built by and for TransCanada, so it's not an American company, but a multinational fossil fuel company that rich people bet on in the stock market. Well, during this clip, Sullivan will mention LNG, which for those of you not up on the lingo, that stands for liquefied natural gas, as in methane gas, a fossil fuel.
If the executive branch continues to dither on America's economic future, Congress can and should act to expedite such projects. That's what we're doing with Keystone. And that's what I'll be pressing the Congress to do for Alaska's and America's next great energy infrastructure project, the Alaska LNG project, which will create thousands of jobs and provide clean and affordable energy to Americans and our allies for decades.
And our allies. Because the point of liquefying gas is to allow multinational companies to take our gas, put it on ships, and sell it around the world. The point of even having LNG is to let multinationals profit from it. And this is the guy John McCain handpicked to be the current chairman of the Republicans' private tax money funnel organization. Senator Dan Sullivan is also joined on the International Republican Institute's board of directors by warmongering psycho, current Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas.
So what should we do now? Again, I think it's pretty simple. Let me lay it out. We should make it clear that Vladimir Putin and Russia will not be a power in the Middle East. We should pressure our partners to do the same thing. We should establish no-fly zones in Syria and make it clear that any aircraft that enters those zones will be shot down. We should make it clear that we will fly where we want and when we want. That any aircraft in Syria, or for that matter in the vicinity of a NATO country that turns off its transponders, will be shot down as a menace to civil aviation and to our allies.
Along with that guy, who has been on the board for a while, a new member of the board of directors is Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who we already know from Congressional Dish 176, Target Venezuela, is openly advocating for regime change in Venezuela. So here's Senator Little Marco, board member of the International Republican Institute, talking about what will happen if the Venezuelan election on July 30th, 2017 doesn't go as desired.
I also know this, and I do not speak for the president, but I have certainly spoken to the president, and I will only reiterate what he has already said, and I've been saying this now for a number of days. I have 100% confidence that if democracy is destroyed once and for all in Venezuela on the 30th in terms of the Maduro regime, the President of the United States is prepared to act unilaterally in a significant and swift way, and that is not a threat. That is the reporting of the truth.
And after that, there was an assassination attempt on President Maduro. Don't know who did it, but it happened, and doesn't smell good. Another newbie on the International Republican Institute's board of directors is former governor of Massachusetts, former Republican candidate for president, and soon to be current senator for the state of Utah, Mitt Romney. And he's another one who is devoted to the cause of using our government and our tax money as tools to expand the freedom of the market, to expand the world trade system. Here's a snippet of a major foreign policy speech he gave 1 month before the 2012 presidential election, so in prime time. And FYI, in this clip, Romney refers to General George Marshall. General George Marshall was a World War II general who was chief of staff to both Presidents Franklin D. Roosevelt and Harry Truman. After the war, as Secretary of State, he, George Marshall, pushed for the Marshall Plan, which was a plan to physically rebuild Europe and, more importantly, integrate Europe economically as part of the world trade system. This was accomplished by attaching strings to the Marshall Plan reconstruction money, such as the requirement that governments eliminate laws that restrain businesses, requirements that reduce spending on the public so that peasants would have to buy private products, and they would have to allow multinationals to sell their products in the European countries. It's the same strategy used over and over and over and over again by the International Monetary Fund. Give countries desperately needed money in return for reforms, which is the code word for changes to economic laws. And so with that in mind, here is new International Republican Institute board member and former face of the Republican Party, Mitt Romney.
Fortunately, we had leaders of courage and vision, both Republicans and Democrats, who knew that America had to support friends who shared our values and prevent today's crises from becoming tomorrow's conflicts. Statesmen like Marshall rallied our nation to rise to its responsibilities as the leader of the free world. We helped our friends to build and sustain free societies and free markets. We defended our friends and ourselves from our common enemies. We led. We led.
Leading for free markets. That's what we do. And there's another current senator who has been recently added to the board of the International Republican Institute. This person is the author of the worst bill I've ever seen, the one that I stopped everything to tell you about in early 2016, which I nicknamed the Authorization for Limitless War, because that's exactly what the bill is. It's an actual authorization for the President of the United States to declare war anywhere for any amount of time. And the author of that psychotic piece of legislation is Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. And by the way, this Republican created this bill during the Obama administration. That's how bipartisan the idea of controlling the world is.
Here's what I've done. I'm making an offer to our president that I believe this war is going to go on for a long time after his presidency. I believe that they're going to go wherever they can on the planet and that we should stop them wherever necessary. And when it comes to means, we should not limit this commander-in-chief or any other commander-in-chief when it comes to means.
And that's not even all the sitting members of Congress on the board of the International Republican Institute. There's also Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa and Representative Kay Granger of Texas. And I ask again, how is this allowed? How are people who are responsible for handing out our tax money allowed to be board members of an organization that receives tax money? Never mind the fact that this organization's purpose is to change the laws and leaders of foreign governments because the CIA is no longer allowed to do that, although we all know that they fucking still do. But the point is, why are these people allowed to be on any board of any organization that receives taxpayer money? They shouldn't be allowed to allocate tax money to themselves. Now, in this regard, as in most things, the Republicans are especially shameless. The Democrats don't take it this far. Because the Democrats' version of the taxpayer money funnel is the National Democratic Institute. The National Democratic Institute, which again publicly calls itself nonpartisan, but whose board of directors is made up entirely of members of the Democratic Party, is in even more countries than the International Republican Institute. The National Democratic Institute says it's worked in 156 countries and has 50 offices around the world. And just like the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute gets its millions from the National Endowment for Democracy, the State Department, USAID, and private who fucking knows. And I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but donations to both the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute are tax deductible, like they're charities or something. It's so gross. But unlike the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, well, they keep their corruption confined to former members of Congress and former high-ranking Democrats in the executive branch. So as usual, the Democratic Party is complicit, but not quite as brazen as the Republicans. But even though it's not staffed by current members of government, they do have some heavy hitters on their all-Democratic Party board of directors. For example, one of the founders and current chairman of the board at the National Democratic Institute is the former Secretary of State during the Clinton administration, Madeleine Albright, who now owns a powerful lobbying company, Albright Stonebridge Group, that helps multinational companies figure out how to get what they want from governments. Here's Madeleine Albright giving the keynote address on May 10th of this year, a month before this hearing, at the National Democratic Institute's 2018 Albright Luncheon. In this clip, she outlines the methods used by this Democratic Party-controlled, tax money-funded, but technically private organization to manipulate other governments.
We are employing every tool at our disposal, from the use of focus groups to the collection of more accurate data, to connections made through social media, to the design of election observer missions, to the drafting of model laws, to partnerships with regional bodies and the United Nations, to the mobilization of public opinion around the equator and from pole to pole.
The web is so big. But anyway, joining her on the board is former senator from Minnesota and Democratic Vice President Walter Mondale, who, yes, is surprisingly still alive. And he is joined on the board by a whole bunch of former members of Congress, including former Democratic North Dakota Senator turned lobbyist Tom Daschle.
We have had one focus now for 3 decades. And that focus is very simply to empower people to be able to govern themselves more effectively. That's what we try to do.
As if Americans are experts at governing ourselves. We're a hot mess. But anyway, back to the NDI Board of Directors. Senator turned lobbyist Tom Daschle is joined on the NDI board by other former members of Congress, like former Senator from Maryland, Barbara Mikulski, former Congressman Sam Gadenson of Connecticut, and former Congressman turned lobbyist Howard Berman. And while these following board members are not current or former members of Congress, their connections and ranks in the Democratic Party are too high to be ignored. I'm referring to current board member Howard Dean, who is the former Democratic governor from Vermont and former chairman of the Democratic National Committee.
I'm incredibly proud to be a member of the board of NDI, which is an incredibly sophisticated organization that does not shrink from bringing democracy to any corner of the earth, including some that we're not allowed in. We get there anyway.
And joining Howard Dean is the current board member, Dennis McDonough, who is President Obama's former chief of staff. And then last, sitting on the Ndi Board of Directors is also Richard Bloom, the filthy rich investment banker who shares a bed and a bank account with his wife, current Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein, my senator here in California. So now that you're all caught up on who's controlling the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Republican Institute, and the National Democratic Institute, let's finally get started with the off-television hearing that took place in the House Foreign Affairs Committee this summer. Here's Chairman of the committee, Representative Ed Royce of California, introducing the first witness.
I'm pleased to welcome our distinguished guests here on the panel, including Mr. Carl Gershman, who has served as president of the National Endowment for Democracy since its founding in 1984. He's a longtime friend of this committee. He's respected worldwide for his work, especially in his efforts to help peaceably end the Cold War and transition countries from behind the Iron Curtain to democracy. And he's done this through non-governmental action.
And here's the second witness.
Mr. Daniel Twining is the president of the International Republican Institute, and previously he served as the counselor and director of the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. He also worked here in Congress. He worked here as a foreign policy advisor to Senator John McCain.
And it turns out that the guy he used to advise on foreign policy, John McCain, well, he pulled the strings that got Daniel Twining his job as the new president of the International Republican Institute. Twining got the job as president of the IRI after newly elected President Trump picked Mark Green, the former congressman turned president of the IRI, to be the head of USAID, which is a part of the State Department that does good deeds, but is also all up in this shit. And Mark Green is still in charge of USAID now. And so with Mark Green moving from this creepy private Republican regime change organization thing into the actual government, that opened up the president's spot at IRI, which John McCain picked Twining to fill. But taking the job meant that Twining had to leave his gig at the German Marshall Fund, which is a think tank invented in the early 1970s in partnership with the West German government, that they said would be a, quote, permanent memorial, unquote, to the Marshall Plan, which again was U.S. tax money used to rebuild Europe as long as the countries that took the money wrote economic laws that complied with the World Trade System. And some fun facts about Daniel Twining: the president of the International Republican Institute supported Hillary Clinton for president in 2016, not Republican Donald Trump. In explaining his decision, he told an Australian newspaper, quote, funnily enough, she's the Republican on foreign policy in this race, unquote. As in, the regime changers thought that she would be their best bet to continue their quest for a global economic system. And I'm 100% sure that he was right. That's why I wouldn't vote for her. Fuck her emails. But before he supported Hillary, Twining publicly supported Marco Rubio for president, who was just picked to sit with him on the board of the International Republican Institute. And I don't know if Twining had anything to do with that, but I wouldn't be surprised. And so that's the guy in charge of the Republican Regime Change Money Funnel Organization. Now let's get introduced to the head of the Democratic Party one.
And we have Mr. Kenneth Wallet. He is president of the National Democratic Institute. And he has co-edited the Middle East Policy Survey and written regularly on foreign affairs for the Los Angeles Times.
He's written regularly for the Los Angeles Times. This is why I get so pissed at corporate media and why I refuse to be a part of it, even if it means that I make significantly less money than my skills are worth forever. Because corporate media whose customers are companies that pay for ads, are allowing these spin masters to pose as journalists. They're not weeding out those with agendas and seeking out the work of journalists who are chasing facts wherever the facts may lead. No, they're welcoming these propagandists in with open arms. And it's because they have the same customers. Wallach works to get companies access to resources in every country on earth, making sure that the governments are functional enough to welcome them and protect them from the local savages. Those companies also pay the corporate media outlets like the LA Times. Same customers. It's the companies. Wallach working for both the National Democratic Institute and the LA Times makes perfect sense when you look at it like that. Media funded with ads is based on manipulating you into buying shit you probably don't need. And so don't be surprised when ad-funded media manipulates you in other ways too. Because I think this hearing today is going to show you that manipulation is what these three organizations do. But before we get into that, we do have a little bit more big picture type stuff to talk about. Because it is very clear who those who want the world trade system to be global consider the biggest threats to their plans. In this clip, Representative Ted Poe of Texas is going to get responses from the witnesses in this order. Carl Gershman, the National Endowment for Democracy president, then Dan Twining, the Republican guy, and then last Ken Wallach, the Democrats guy.
Globally, what do you personally see is the number one entity that is a threat to democracy worldwide? Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it North Korea? Is it ISIS? Is it Iran? Pick one. Pick the one you think is the threat. China.
China.
Mr. Twining?
China.
Mr. Wallach? Russia. Russia and China. Okay.
Of course, the Democratic Party guy said Russia. But Russia and China, those are the big two. And the next episode I'm going to produce is going to be about China. There were a bunch of clips in this hearing about China that I want to share, but I also saw something in the NDAA, which I've started to read already, that I'm not ready to talk about yet because I haven't confirmed what I think I saw. But basically, I think China deserves its own episode. And so that's how Congressional Dish is going to end 2018. But Russia, they were the big bad enemy after World War II, and they're back to enemy status again, which really started in earnest, more recently when Russia stopped our regime change in Syria and then took back Crimea. This is what all these people are referring to when you hear about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But after the Ukrainian government was replaced, Russia took control of a peninsula that hangs off the coast of Ukraine, Crimea, that houses a major Russian military base and a lot of their naval fleet. And in the last week, you probably heard on the news that Russia seized some Ukrainian ships and the Ukrainians on them off the coast of Crimea. And that's all connected to the fact that Crimea is Russian now, even though our government and our partners refuse to accept that. And so what that is the tension simply escalating. It's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But big picture, here's what the world traders want from Russia. This was written by Carl Gerschmann, the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, in the Washington Post just a couple of months before the government in Ukraine was replaced. And as a quick refresher, the Ukrainian government in 2013 was negotiating a trade agreement, which are the pieces of paper that legally bind countries to the world trade system. Well, the Ukrainians were just about to sign one with the European Union when Russia, the country that supplies most of the gas that heats Ukrainian homes, they offered the Ukrainian government a better deal. They offered Ukraine discounted gas and the money that it needed, but without the strings attached by the World Trade System. They weren't requiring any changes to their laws. And so the old Ukrainian government decided not to partner with the World Trade System / the EU, but instead signed the deal with Russia. And a couple months later, that government was gone. And during that time that Ukraine was making their decision about who to partner with economically, this is what Carl Gershman wrote, quote, Russia has used economic and security threats to draw post-communist countries into its Eurasian Customs Union and to block the European Union's Eastern Partnership Initiative, which seeks the reform and possible eventual integration of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine into EU structures, unquote. So that's what the World Trade System is trying to do. It's trying to suck in all those countries. And then a couple of years later, in 2016, Gershman wrote in the journal Sentinel, quote, it has been generally assumed that the West could encourage the liberalization of countries such as Russia and China by engaging with them and integrating them into the democratic international order, unquote. But then he says it hasn't worked out that way. And so the big game is that they want a truly global system, and they want Russia and China to be a part of it too. But Russia and China are setting up their own organizations with countries that don't follow the World Trade System rules. And Russia has stopped one regime change in Syria and fought back against another one in their next door neighbor in Ukraine. And so that's the big game. That's why Russia and China are on our enemy list. They're challenging this system and setting up other systems. And so looking at those regime changes, which I can't get into all of the details of these again, but to get the scoop on Syria, listen to Congressional Dish 172, the illegal bombing of Syria. And for Ukraine, again, listen to Congressional Dish 167, combating Russia. But as far as Syria is concerned, if you're wondering if these organizations are involved there, the answer is yes. This is Kenneth Wallach, the president of the National Democratic Institute, or NDI, which again is funded by the National Endowment for Democracy.
Another story of democratic resilience is unfolding in Syria. In northern Syria, citizen groups are prioritizing community needs, and local administrative councils are responding by providing critical services. 50 NDI governance advisors are working each day in 34 locations to advise citizen groups and administrative councils and bringing them together to solve problems.
They have 50 people in 34 locations in Syria. They're involved. And then how about in Ukraine? Well, in my research for this episode, I did learn some more nuggets about what went down in Ukraine back during coup time. This is a clip from May 15th, 2015, a little over a year after the new government, with the people named by coup planner Victoria Nuland, was installed in Ukraine. This clip is from an interview conducted on a stage by former Congresswoman from Torrance, California, Jane Harman, whose district included the headquarters of Northrop Grumman and Boeing and Lockheed Martin, just gigantic defense contractors. That's who she represented. And she is sitting on the stage and speaking to Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State and current chairman of the National Democratic Institute.
Ukraine. You and I were there together. Madeleine led the delegation, of course she did, for the National Democratic Institute, which she chairs. And the International Republican Institute was also there during the first Ukraine election in May of last year. And among other things, we met with the presidential candidates, including Poroshenko and Tymoshenko, and we tooled around in Kyiv. And I also went to Odessa to see how the voting was going.
Huh. So during that election that legitimized the new government, look who was there. The National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute, along with Jane Harman and Madeleine Albright. And remember who else Victoria Nuland mentioned in her leaked Ukrainian government planning call? She mentioned Vice President Joe Biden. And here he is talking about his efforts to shape the new Ukrainian government at the December 2014 National Democratic Institute's Democracy Award dinner.
That's why in Ukraine, working alongside groups like NDI, with your leadership, we're providing to the Ukrainians, as we have to the Iraqis, personnel from each of our departments, teaching them how to literally, as I said, write a budget. Expertise from our Justice Department, teaching them the tools that are available to ensure that the court systems are free and transparent. We're helping Ukrainian officials develop laws and regulations that will establish anti-corruption institutions within the government, enable authorities to combat corruption more effectively. Our militaries are working together to improve the Ukrainian capacity to provide its own defense and a military system that meets the standards of democracies.
And we know that since 2014, Congress has given a lot of money to Ukraine, and the Defense Department funding for 2019 is already done. And so I checked. For 2019, Ukraine is going to get $250 million of our tax money funneled to it through the Department of Defense, which is an increase of $50 million. Because when we first started giving Ukraine money right after the regime change in 2014, it was $50 million for Ukraine or for non-governmental organizations that would monitor Ukrainian elections and support economic reforms. That definition sounds awfully familiar. Sounds a lot like exactly what the National Endowment for Democracy and its Republican and Democratic Party affiliated partners do, doesn't it? The 2014 bill also provided $100 million for defensive weapons and military training. And so in 2014, Ukraine got somewhere between $100 and $150 million of our tax money plus weapons. In 2019, they're getting $250 million in cash. And on top of our tax money, it was reported just a few weeks ago in mid-November that the State Department and the Ukrainian government are in negotiations for another delivery of lethal weapons this time. So our involvement in Ukraine has only escalated since the 2014 regime change. The trajectory is clear. And what else is clear is that the world traders, for lack of a better label, are changing the laws and government structure in Ukraine. You just heard former Vice President Joe Biden discuss how groups like NDI are teaching Ukrainians how court systems should work. And anyone who listened to Congressional Dish 167 remembers this clip of Joe Biden bragging about getting a Ukrainian prosecutor fired.
I was, not but it just happened to be that was the assignment I got. I got all the good ones. So I got Ukraine. And I remember going over convincing our team or others to convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
Which lays bare the strategy that they often use to get foreign governments to obey before violence is required. Dangle cash in front of them or take cash away. But clearly, these organizations are meddling in the Ukraine justice system. And then in this hearing, Carl Gershman, the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, he told us this.
Other examples include the support that NED has given in Ukraine to the Anti-Corruption Action Center that has tirelessly led the campaign for the establishment of an independent anti-corruption court. And I'm pleased to report that just last week, the Ukrainian parliament at long last approved legislation to create such a court.
So the Vice President of the United States admitted to influencing the staffing at the Ukrainian Justice Department. He then gives a speech at the National Democratic Institute when he said that their people are teaching new officials how to set up their Justice Department. And now a new court has been created, which was a condition required by the International Monetary Fund in order for Ukraine to receive $2 billion. And actually, the Ukrainian parliament had approved a law creating a new court earlier this year, but they were told to rewrite it because the IMF wanted them to. It kind of shows you who's really calling the shots in Ukraine right now, doesn't it? But the International Monetary Fund money strings are not the only way that Ukraine is being manipulated. Here's Carl Gershman of the National Endowment for Democracy showing you why I refer to these people as spin masters.
But you got to build a defense against it. And a lot of the groups that we help stop fake in Ukraine and other groups like that are being able to identify fake information. We have a dialogue, a very ongoing dialogue with the internet companies to take down a lot of incitement, a lot of fake news. We're connecting our grantees with the internet companies. We have groups like Bellingcat, which is an investigative journalist group. They use open source information, but they've identified, the Russian general who provided the missile that shot down the Malaysian airliner.
Oh, now, I don't know what happened with the Malaysian airliner. I have no clue. I don't know if anybody does. But I looked at Bellingcat's website. They have no ads and they have a donation button. But nowhere do they tell you that they are getting money from the National Endowment for Democracy, which they are. This was confirmed on the verified Twitter account of the founder of Bellingcat, Eliot Higgins, on February 6, 2017. And of course, I have the tweet for you in the show notes. But they've also taken money not only from the National Endowment for Democracy, but also from Google. But to look at their website, it looks like they're just a bunch of muckraker kids funding their work with donations. We can't trust anybody. And listen to how many people are in these organizations' web. This is Kenneth Wallach, the president of the National Democratic Institute.
Ukrainians can point to concrete achievements in recent years. These include the emergence of new political parties that have national reach and are focused on citizens they represent rather than on oligarchs who would finance them. Brought together by NDI in partnership with the European Parliament, party factions in the Rada are overcoming deep fragmentation to agree on procedures that will make it easier to build consensus around reforms. In NDI programs alone, more than 45,000 citizens have engaged directly in the national reform process and reaching more than 1.3 million citizens through the media.
National Democratic Institute programs have worked directly with 45,000 people in Ukraine, and they're embedded in the media. You know, I've been saying this for almost 2 years, ever since fake news became a focus of the powerful. But they're aware now of the power of the internet, and they're doing what they can to harness that power, to control that power, which means using whatever methods they can to control what gets posted on the internet. Here's Dan Twining, the Republican guy.
In Europe, the Kremlin is deploying a sophisticated information warfare campaign to undermine democratic institutions, erode citizen trust in democracy, and wedge apart the transatlantic alliance. This form of warfare is particularly insidious, this political warfare, because it uses core features of democracy against us, exploiting our free media, manipulating false information, undermining confidence in electoral systems. IRI's Beacon Project is engaged in a big line of work to leverage our relationships with European political parties and civil society groups to track Russian misinformation, including in many local languages, and then to coordinate political responses to that.
So the IRI Beacon Project is a project for information war, and they say it's targeted at Russia, but we all use the internet. The Beacon Project, according to IRI, is designed to inform and influence European leaders by partnering with political parties, think tanks, activists, and media organizations to get out their desired messages. It's a propaganda outlet, technically private, but funded in a roundabout way by the U.S. Congress. And a former member of Congress, Mike Rogers, is on the Beacon Project Steering Committee. Mike Rogers is the former chairman of the powerful House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. During his time on that committee, he didn't do so much oversight as he helped the spooks do whatever they wanted. Like when James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, straight up lied to Congress, and Mike Rogers did absolutely nothing about it.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
That was a lie. But Mike Rogers was a partner of the spooks. He was not interested in policing them. And this is further proven by the fact that he was the author of CISPA, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act. Now, his version didn't end up becoming law, but something very close to it, CISA, did become law as a dingleberry to government funding that was passed at the end of 2015. But basically, the bill that Mike Rogers wrote, which is essentially mission accomplished, gives companies legal immunity for sharing our digital information with the government and with each other. And the government is allowed to use the information collected from these companies against us in court for a bunch of crimes. All of this in the name of cybersecurity. And you can learn all about this in Congressional Dish 113, CISA is law. But the point is that this guy, Mike Rogers, who in his powerful position in Congress worked to legalize the sharing of our digital information, destroying our digital privacy rights and our Fourth Amendment guarantee that warrants would be needed to go through our shit. Well, that guy is now on the steering committee for the IRI's Beacon Project, which is all about information warfare. And Russia, just so you know, in response, banned the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute around the same time that the Beacon Project was announced to the world. And the National Endowment for Democracy was banned even earlier than that. They were the first non-governmental organization that Russia had ever banned. They banned them in 2015. But they said that all three of these organizations are undesirable and that they're threats to Russia's national security, which they totally are. And before I move on, I might as well mention that Mike Rogers is joined on the Beacon Project Steering Committee by the former Foreign Minister of Latvia, the former Slovak ambassador to the United States, a dude from the McCain Institute, so that's a thing, and a guy from the US-based free market think tank, the American Enterprise Institute, because of course. So that's the Republicans Institute's information warfare plan, or at least a part of it. So now let's hear from the Democratic Party's Institute. Here's Kenneth Wallach.
Authoritarian regimes are using digital tools to advance their interests, including electoral espionage and the dissemination of disinformation to skew electoral outcomes, disrupt democratic discourse, discredit democratic institutions, and fuel ethnic and social divisions. NDI has responded by providing cybersecurity support, assisting efforts of civic, media, and political groups to detect, expose, and combat disinformation, and conducting new types of public opinion research to identify populations that are most susceptible to Russian disinformation and develop messages that can build resilience. In cooperation with IRI and NED, NDI is helping to launch a new effort with democracy groups, civil society organizations, civic tech partners, political parties, and a global network of 4 million citizen election monitors to interact more regularly with the technology companies.
4 million election monitors that will interact with the tech companies. Oh, so many questions. 4 million people. Who the fuck are they? What the fuck do they do? Who the fuck pays them? Well, we know who pays them. We do with our tax money via these creepy, private, but not really organizations. But who are all the people paying them? And then interact with the tech companies. What does that mean? Now, obviously, I'm not in on this, so I don't really know. But I have a suspicion. And listeners of the last few years of this podcast know that I've had this suspicion for a while. And Matt Taibbi, well, he just confirmed it. In a must-read article published on November 26th by Rolling Stone, which of course I have for you in this episode's show notes, along with sources for all this crazy-sounding stuff that I'm saying today. Well, in that Rolling Stone article, Matt Taibbi explains in his brilliant way how all of the Russian interference stuff and the fake news stuff is being used as cover for, and I want to be careful with my words here, members of the Republican and Democratic parties, because that's accurate, to get the tech companies to do the censorship that they want done, but don't want the government to be technically doing, because it looks better when it's private. You know, that's why the entire National Endowment for Democracy even exists. It looks better when it's private. But basically, what Facebook in particular did on October 11th was delete 810 Facebook accounts, some of them with millions of followers. Facebook said that the accounts were pushing political spam. But Facebook refused to tell us what accounts they killed, making it pretty hard for us to judge for ourselves if they were actually spammers. Although I found some lists and I put them in the show notes, because obviously the purged are telling everyone that they still can about it. And I recognized a few names on the list. For example, the Anti-Media. I've been following their Twitter account for years. I like their information on war-related stuff in particular, and I use their articles in the same way that I use Wikipedia. I read their version of events, but they provide links to their sources. And so I use them to find documents and videos and clips and stuff that I didn't even know was there because they link to very real primary sources. And they were in the Facebook purge. They're not fake, whatever fake even means. The authors are brilliant writers, some of them. They write insightful articles, much of it challenging the official government message. But they back their shit up, at least most of the time that I've seen, and they aren't spamming anyone. I choose to follow them. What they are, though, is independent. They're not corporate media. They challenge the World Trade System message. They are apparently a threat to it, just like me. They're just a lot bigger. And I just checked, the Anti-Media account was shut down by Twitter, too. So I guess I don't follow them anymore because I'm not seeing those articles anymore and I didn't even know. That's how this works. The account gets deleted and people like me and you don't even realize that we're not seeing the information anymore. It's just one needle missing from the haystack. Or in this case, 810 needles missing from the haystack. Facebook said that they removed the accounts, which were all over the political spectrum. But they said that they removed the accounts because they posted political content, quote, to build an audience and drive traffic to their websites, unquote. Well, yeah, of course they did. That's what being an online artist or journalist or writer is all about. We're all trying to do that. That's not spam. That's social media marketing. So that tells me that Facebook didn't just aim this at Russian bots or intelligence officers' accounts. They're censoring us. They're censoring people just like me, who are backing up what they say with primary sources, but aren't preaching the World Trade System gospel. And this is a scandal. And I think this should be investigated as a financial crime committed by Facebook. Because a lot of people in the purge built businesses around Facebook, worked for years, just like I have to build an audience, but they built their businesses on Facebook, based on Facebook's promises to be just a neutral place to post your crap. A lot of these people built those audiences by buying advertisements on Facebook, spending literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to work within Facebook's universe just to have Facebook delete their account one day. Poof! Their livelihoods and investments gone. But I don't trust Republicans or Democrats, who have literally 99% of the seats in Congress, to defend those of us who are getting purged. Because listen to what I'm saying in this episode. I'm expecting to be included in a purge one day. This is why I'm not all that concerned about you following me on social media. I'm counting on this show being built on websites that I own, and the podcast will grow based on word of mouth. I mean, I am investing a little in social media for the next few months to see if it grows the show at all. But I am not and never have built my business on their platforms for just this reason. And I know that this takes longer to build, but my independent foundation will be stronger. Although if they want to take me down, they'll find a way. But that's not the point. The point is that the people in Congress who are supposed to police these businesses are begging them to do this. These clips are of current members of Congress questioning representatives from Facebook, Twitter, and Google in hearings that took place in November 2017. This is Representative Terry Sewell of Alabama, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, and Representative Jackie Speer of California, who, by the way, is the representative for where all three of those companies have their headquarters. Oh no, Facebook and Google are in her district. I think Twitter is in Pelosi's. But regardless, she's their representative in Congress. And yeah, here is what our members of Congress told the tech companies.
I submit to you that your efforts have to be more than just about finding malicious and deceptive activity, that you have a responsibility, all of you have a responsibility to make sure that we are not adding to the problem by not being as rigorous and as aggressive as we can in terms of vetting the content and in terms of making sure that we are being really dynamic in doing that.
And ultimately, you are American companies, and threats to American election security and threats to American peace and order are things that concern you greatly, correct? And I gather that all of your companies have moved beyond any notion that your job is only to provide a platform and whatever goes across it is not your affair.
RT, Russia Today, on your platform has 2.2 million subscribers. Fox News on your platform has 740,000 subscribers. CNN has 2.3 million subscribers. The intelligence community assessment that was made public in January spoke about RT, and it said, RT conducts strategic messaging for Russian government. It seeks to influence politics and fuel discontent in the United States. So my question to you is, why have you not shut down RT on YouTube?
It's called Russia Today. We know what that is. You don't get to determine if I should be allowed to see it. I'm a big girl. And by the way, on RT is Larry King and Governor Jesse Ventura. So let's just calm the down. But the point is that Congress should be defending our right to receive information from wherever information is being disseminated from, especially political information. It's the most protected form of speech. First Amendment, number 1. And it's still censorship if the fucking private sector does it. But that's not what these people in Congress are doing. They want the tech companies to take down information. They want our information censored by the tech companies. They're telling them to do it. And I think Matt Taibbi summed up what's happening perfectly. He said this is, quote, a misuse of a public emergency to suspend civil rights and concentrate power, unquote. Those in power are using the power of the tech companies, not keeping that power in check as a functional government is supposed to do. And so, with the complicity of the people who are supposed to represent us, Facebook is moving full steam ahead into integrating with the World Trade System and serving them. Facebook is also working with the Atlantic Council, which is one of those creepy World Trade System pushing organizations that we should be paying a lot of attention to, that has at least 6 former CIA heads on its board of directors. And, of course, there's this. Here's National Democratic Institute President Kenneth Wallach talking to Chairman Ed Royce.
But this is a daily fight on the ground. To give
a social media fight?
Yes. To give you one example, the Democratic Party of Serbia, 2 weeks before the local elections, the Russians, presumably the Russians, had hacked their Facebook page, put horrible content on it. The hackers then contacted Facebook, told them to look at the site. Facebook immediately took down the Facebook page. Now, the party didn't know who to contact. They had no contact with Facebook. They were able to contact us. Our office in Silicon Valley managed to reach the Facebook executives. They immediately took it down.
Facebook immediately took down a page after being contacted by the National Democratic Institute. And according to Matt Taibbi, who I totally trust, Facebook is working with the International Republican Institute too. Keeping in mind who makes up 100% of the board of directors of these organizations, this means Facebook is censoring for the Republican and Democratic parties. And they are removing accounts from people all over the world. And
in cooperation with IRI and NED, NDI is helping to launch a new effort with democracy groups, civil society organizations, civic tech partners, political parties, and a global network of 4 million citizen election monitors to interact more regularly with the technology companies.
what do you think interaction with the tech companies means? You know, all I know for sure is that we're not supposed to know for sure. We're not supposed to know what they're up to at all, because if we were, then this clip wouldn't cause the reaction in you that it's about to cause. Here's Carl Gershman of the National Endowment for Democracy.
I'd call your attention, for example, to some recent events, among them the remarkable democratic transition in Gambia, the fall of a corrupt Zuma government in South Africa, the stunning victory of democracy in Malaysia, and the freeing of opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim, the equally stunning triumph of democracy in Armenia, and the successful local elections in Tunisia that are, in my view, a decisive step forward in the Arab world's first democracy. These are just a few of the examples that I could give of recent democratic advances. There's Slovakia, interesting developments in Ethiopia. Even in a country like Uzbekistan, we can see some glimmerings of some opening.
What? Transition in Gambia, fall of the government in South Africa, victory in Malaysia, triumph in Armenia, successful elections in Tunisia? I know nothing about any of that. And it's 11:35 p.m. on a Friday night. I have to stop researching this, or this episode will never be finished. But you bet your ass I'm going to revisit these topics. But for now, here's a few clips about some of these situations that might shed a little light on the whole what the f***ness of it all. And so here's Dan Twining, the Repub, talking about the victory in Malaysia.
But in Malaysia, IRI has been working with the opposition there since 2002. Malaysia was essentially a one-party majoritarian state. The ruling party had ruled since 1957. It had gerrymandered all the districts, given itself every advantage. But in this last election, a month ago, the opposition won for the first time in 60-something years. And that was an example of playing the long game, right? We, the United States, supported a democratic opposition that is now in charge of this very strategic country, right there on the front lines of the South China Sea, right there on the front lines of the Islamic world's intersection with the rest of Asia. And that's good for America.
First of all, isn't it ironic hearing a Republican talking about the gerrymandering of districts to give themselves all the advantage? Ugh. But as far as this Malaysia stuff is concerned, I know nothing about any of that. And so now let's move on to Tunisia. Here's Carl Gershman of the National Endowment for Democracy being pretty blunt about the extent of our interference in the Tunisian election.
The last example is the nonpartisan training conducted by 4 NGOs in Tunisia of new candidates who participated in last month's local elections. Of the 235 individuals who were trained, 112 won seats, and 25 were at the heads of their electoral lists.
These organizations got their people to run for office and won half the seats in Tunisia. And here's Representative Eliot Engel of New York doing no oversight into this at all and giving us a clue as to why this whole Tunisia thing was done.
In the Middle East, Tunisia's progress has been inspiring, and we should help improve the climate for foreign investment there. Foreign
investment. They want to make it safe for multinationals to operate there and extract profit. Same story in country after country. And this explains an old mystery. It explains why, in the 2017 Defense Authorization, Tunisia was added to the list of countries that are now eligible for Defense Department money. Because Tunisia, and I'm embarrassed that I knew nothing about this, but Tunisia was one of the regimes changed during the 2011 so-called Arab Spring. And that was before I started this podcast in 2012 and when I still had my head up my ass. But yeah, I don't have the time to deep dive into this today. But what I do know is that the regime was changed after protest in 2011. A new constitution passed in 2014. Tunisia started getting money from the Defense Department in 2017. And there was an election full of people trained by these non-governmental organizations in May of 2018, just 1 month before this hearing. And the Reuters article announcing the results of that election had the headline, quote, "Independent candidates get most votes in Tunisia's municipal elections," unquote. But there's cause to wonder just how independent they really are. And then last for this episode, the triumph in Armenia. This is Representative Brad Sherman of California talking to Carl Gershman, the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, or NED.
And I want to turn our attention to Yerevan and Armenia. NED has allocated $1.3 million last year. Now we've seen a real move toward democracy. Are you going to do more given the fluid situation there?
Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the answer is yes. Our board, which meets later this week, is making Armenia what we call a country eligible for contingency funds, which are funds set aside for new situations. And obviously what's happened in Armenia is very new. And I think there are several priorities that have to be addressed. I mean, there are going to be quick elections that have been called in Armenia, and those elections, have to have integrity to them to give legitimacy to the current Pashinyan government. There is a parliament that oversees this, and government officials are really new to the governing game. The system has been controlled by, a centralized authority for a number of years. And so a lot of training is going to have to be necessary for some of the new government officials. And then finally, there's going to be a big information war, the kind of issue raised by Congressman Royce. And it is very essential in this period, and this is what the groups that we help are doing, is to get people reliable and independent information so that they make the judgments based upon the disinformation that is going to be promoted by the forces that have just been removed from power.
I love off-television hearings. Gershman really opened the playbook on that one. Give money to the people that you want in charge, quick elections to make the installed government legitimate, train the new government officials, and information war to silence the government that just got overthrown. It's smarter and sneakier than shock and awe, I'll give them that. And the number of places where they are operating is totally overwhelming. I went through all my sound clip transcripts from this hearing, all 50 of them. And these are all of the countries that were mentioned as targets of some kind of transition. So obviously they talked about Russia and China, but they also talked about transitions in Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, Libya, Georgia, Gambia, South Africa, Malaysia, Armenia, Tunisia, the Republic of the Congo, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Burundi, Rwanda, Nicaragua, Colombia, Guatemala, Indonesia, Cambodia, Slovakia, Uzbekistan, Serbia, Morocco, Jordan, and Lebanon. That's 28 countries. See why I'm overwhelmed? I have no idea what's happening in the vast majority of those places, even though apparently my tax money is being spent to make it happen. And speaking of our tax money, there is one group of people inside our government that doesn't want to spend at least as much of our tax money on the shady work of the National Endowment for Democracy and their political party-controlled partner NGOs. And that group is the Trump administration. Here's Representative Eliot Engel of New York during the hearing.
The budget proposal for fiscal year 2019 requested $67 million for NED, which is a 60% cut from the amount, which is $170 million, that Congress has appropriated yearly since FY16.
And that's not all. Buried in the State Department's fiscal 2019 budget request, so this is from the Trump administration, is a proposal not only to cut the budget of the National Endowment for Democracy by over half, but to also cut off its relationships with the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute. Now, the proposal wouldn't eliminate these political party-controlled private organizations from existence, like I wish it would, but would instead shift their funding to the State Department, where they would have to compete for funding with truly private contractors, instead of automatically splitting a fourth of whatever the National Endowment for Democracy gets. Here's the president of the National Endowment for Democracy's reaction to this proposal.
I mean, there are obviously two fundamental problems with the OMB budget request for fiscal 2019, the amount and separating us from the four institutes. And both of these are devastating. I don't even want to get into now what we would have to cut. They're devastating, utterly devastating. It would virtually kill the whole program.
And maybe this is why the Trump administration wants to kill the program. Here's Carl Gershman again.
And I think it should not be forgotten. NED was created as an independent institution so that even when you have problems, whatever the problems are with the executive branch, our work continues consistently. And I think that was a brilliant idea. And it's in the National Endowment for Democracy Act adopted by the Congress by Dante Fascell in 1983. And I think it was brilliant to give the NED that kind of independence so that we can go forward regardless of what the policies of the executive branch are at any particular time.
We can go forward regardless of what the policies of the executive branch are at any particular time. And we know that Congress isn't doing any real oversight, considering a member of the board of directors is on the damn oversight committee. Because how can organizations that funnel money to Republicans and Democrats be properly policed by Republicans and Democrats? There is an inherent conflict of interest there. And the only person, Dana Rohrabacher, who challenged the work of these organizations at all during the hearing, clearly felt like he was doing something wrong.
So I've had my say. I know I'm making everybody mad at me, but I had to say it.
And so who is policing the National Endowment for Democracy and the organizations that are run 100% by high-ranking members of the Republican and Democratic parties? It looks like no one. Because even the weak-ass oversight sort of provided by Representative Rohrabacher won't be there next year because he lost his election. And so this is one budget cut request by the Trump administration that I totally get. If I were president of the United States, I wouldn't be happy about having rogue organizations undermining my foreign policy decisions either. Now, obviously, while I have to wrap up this episode, this is just the beginning. 28 countries. There's so much more to look into here. But what I want to leave you with for now is this, because this is what really matters, at least to me. Here's Carl Gershman, the president of the National Endowment for Democracy.
I take pride in the fact that when we make grants to groups abroad, I take pride that it's with American taxpayer money. We try to protect that money. We try to make sure that every single dollar is spent well. But I take pride in the fact that that's a demonstration of the support coming from the American people.
They're doing this in our names. And so it's uncomfortable to think about, but we're complicit too. Getting our country in check is important for the entire world. But it's going to require having a real conversation as a country about our role in pushing the world trade system upon the world. And this is where I get tired and pessimistic because most of us don't even know that America for 70 years has stood for a global economic system in which citizens get no votes. These international rules trump our laws. No pun intended, I swear. But listen to the World Trade Organization episode. I discovered this whole thing when Congress repealed the requirement that some meat producers tell us on labels where our meat comes from. They didn't do that because there was a bunch of Americans saying, hey, I don't want to know where my meat comes from. They repealed that requirement because requiring more paperwork from foreign meat companies is World Trade Organization illegal. And so we had to change our law or be fined. What the But it makes sense. Because that's what this system requires of everyone. Change your laws, obey or else. And so, of course, we're going to be affected by the system that our money is being spent to create and that our citizens are being sent to die defending. And so that's the reality that we need to, 1, make our fellow Americans aware of, and 2, decide if that's really what we stand for. Because again, I've said this so many times, but we do live in a world that's connected. Products are sold globally. Pollution emitted anywhere affects all of us who breathe on this flying rock in space that we all call home. Having global rules makes sense. And I agree with the masters of the universe that a, quote, rules-based international order, unquote, makes sense. But it matters what the rules are, and it matters who writes them. And right now, none of us citizens play any role in writing or approving them. And the rules are based around producing endless growth for companies on a planet with limited resources. You know, I really do think that some form of democracy is the best system there is for organizing a fair society. Every citizen of the world should get a vote on the rules. The World Trade System is not a democracy, and democracy is not what is required of the countries brought into its web. And the economic system they push instead, it's hurting people. It's allowing a small group of people to hoard damn near all the wealth via stock market bets, while the rest of us fight for scraps, expected to work to produce their wealth until the day we die. And of course, the endless resource gobbling is polluting the entire planet. It's physically hurting humans and animals alike. We need to switch to a system not based on endless growth, because endless growth is impossible, to a system based on sustainability. And a global system based on rules is a good idea, but not this one. But this is what America stands for right now. And the National Endowment for Democracy is a symptom of that. It's only one piece. But at least now I know about it, and you know about it. And I guess that's a start. You know, there's a lot about what I learned producing this episode that's been sticking in my head, but one thing that I can't quite shake is the fact that corporate media whose customers are companies that pay for ads, are allowing spin masters like Ken Wallach to pose as journalists. You know, these organizations, NED, IRI, NDI, they exist to open markets to companies. They want to stabilize and make governments permissive so that companies can do business there. And those companies pay for corporate media. Those companies are the true customers. Those are the ones that these corporate media outlets are trying to please. And so if you want to please companies, you let their advocates pretend to be journalists. But they would not do this if they saw you and I as their true customers, which is why I would never allow any of these people to produce an episode of Congressional Dish. But that's because my podcast doesn't exist to serve companies. I serve you. And we're doing important work here. And today in particular, I feel like we're making a real difference. Because this hearing has had 966 views in 6 months on the internet. This tiny podcast will expose this hearing to 10 times as many people as were aware of it before. The voluntary payments from the few people who are already supporting this podcast, you did that. You are, in a very real, countable way, sharing this critical information that the corporate media purposefully ignores. The companies that pay for corporate media, they don't want us to know that our government is being misused for their benefit. And more importantly, the people misusing our government don't want us to understand how they manipulate people in other countries because they're using the same tricks to manipulate us too. And we all feel it. We all know that we're all being bullshitted constantly. And some of us are aware that the bullshitting started long before there was a President Trump. Well, because of my funding model based on voluntary payment, which, yeah, it feels and sounds a lot like begging if you're not used to the concept, but it's this funding model that allows me to cut through the bullshit. Asking you for money is the only way that I can do this and do it well. Because I cannot do my job correctly if my income is based on pleasing advertisers or a government agency or foundations or NGOs like the NED or IRI or NDI. Because they're funding media outlets all over the world, but they're not funding Congressional Dish, and I won't let them. And that's because the only way that you can trust that I'm not being paid by any of them is if I'm 100% paid by you, which means, yes, you need to part ways with some cash to make this work. Because while I'm proud that this episode will expose 10 times as many people to this hearing and some of the information provided in it than were previously aware, it's only 10,000 people. There are 330 million people in this country. And there are dozens of hearings just like this one, not aired on C-SPAN, not aired on television in the United States, but full of information that we want and need. And I want to share them all with you. But I can't scale this up by myself. I need to start telling people about this podcast on social media. I know that. but it's going to cost more money every month to pay Jess, our virtual assistant, and Sarah, Jess and Sarah, to do that. And I need help sorting through and researching this information. And I'm finally going to be having some help, but I can only afford to pay one person part-time. And so that's me full-time plus a half of me, which is the equivalent of 3 eyeballs on Congress. It's not enough. And so I need your help. And here's how you can help. I need you to pay for the show regularly in whatever amount and method you think is fair. And a lot of people ask me what I think is fair, and I'm hesitant to give a number, but you keep asking. So while I think that the show has a lot more value than this, I feel like $5 per episode, because that's about what I would pay for a documentary on iTunes. I feel like $5 per episode is the minimum of fair, because I'm basically busting out an audio documentary every 2 weeks. But you can pick any number above 0 and be cool by me. The only number that truly burns is 0. Because I don't think this information is worthless. I don't think that finding it or sharing it with you is worthless. And if you're honest with yourself about it and not just trying to justify not paying, I don't think you think that this is worthless either. And so pay for Congressional Dish, goddammit. I'm so tired of the money drought. I need to see some growth in this podcast, especially while I'm trying to grow it. And so I've set up every payment option possible to make this as convenient for you as possible. And so, if you want to pay per episode, we have Patreon. And so for those of you who want me to produce more episodes, you should look into this option, because this is the only one that guarantees me payment if I produce more episodes. This also gives you early access to the green room, which is where you will find the uncensored golf swing free versions of every episode. That said, if you don't want to get charged more if I'm able to produce more episodes, monthly subscriptions help me budget, and I love them. And so for monthly subscriptions, you can use your credit or debit card with PayPal by clicking the Make This a Monthly Donation checkbox. You can also use your online bank to send checks to the address in Florida listed on the Donation Quick Links box on any page of congressionaldish.com. In fact, using your bank account, you can send checks as often as you like. The online banks give you all kinds of flexibility. Same with Zelle, which is an app used by just about all the major banks and is super easy to use. You can send those payments to donation@congressionaldish.com. And monthly support can be sent with our new payment method, the Cash App. You can send those payments to $Congressional Dish or donation@congressionaldish.com. PayPal, Zelle, the Cash App, your online bank, and Venmo all allow you to send payments whenever you feel like it. And when you start a regular payment or you send in a lump sum payment, you can email or somehow digitally send me a brief message and have it read on air during the thank you segment, which is the end of each show when I spend time hanging out with you. But basically, I've done everything I can on my end. I've produced this episode, I've paid for the help I needed to produce it quickly, and I set up every payment method that you've asked me to set up. Now, please, it's your turn. Help me produce at least one more bit of media in the United States that exists to serve you and not the companies that control the world. I need you. I really do. And with that, class dismissed. All right, so now that the main show is over, we can stop talking about world order and thank the people who paid for the last episode of Congressional Dish. And I would like to start first with our new subscribers. These are people that are paying for the show regularly. And as has been a pattern lately, we have a lot of people that are signing up on Patreon, and I appreciate you guys all so much. But you do get the golf swing free feed if you sign up on Patreon. So I think that might be a motivation for the Patreon push. But first up, I would like to thank Nick Secord, who is giving the podcast a raise. This is a raise from $9.50 an episode to $10.50 an episode. And he said, I got a raise, so you do too. Keep up the great work. Well, thank you very much for sharing the love. We also are now getting, this is another raise from $5 an episode to $7.50 an episode from Nancy Zakiglu. And she said, hi, Jen. Thanks for the tax cut episode. You and your guest, Alexis, did a great job of making that topic into an informative and enjoyable episode. And I appreciated that you took the time, as usual, to fully research and report on the parts of the tax code changes that were not in your guest's area of expertise. I have long appreciated how hard you worked to produce your show and just finally got around to adjusting my contribution, as it seems that you really deserve more than the creators who do shows that are for the most part just conversations with guests. Nancy. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And The only reason I giggled when you mentioned Alexis is that I just sent her a text. I'm sitting here. I just got back from a run and we have something called a shame thread. And so when we exercise, we throw it in each other's faces. And when I told her it's beautiful outside, everybody got off your butts. She told me they pay me to sit on my butt. And so I sent her a picture of a gravestone with her name on it and the quote, "They pay me to sit on my butt." So Alexis, the accountant, is definitely busy today and I'm trolling her. So that's the only reason I giggled when you said her name. But yeah, that was a fun episode and she's the best and she works so hard. So yeah, thanks again, Alexis, for being on the show. We also just got, so we're now getting $15 a month. This is a check from someone who would like to be anonymous. And this is an increase from $5 a month to $15 a month. So Lauren is unsure if this is a raise or bonus, but either way, thank you very much. You know who you are. We also are now getting $10 a month from Tariq Laos, and this is on PayPal. So thank you, Tariq. Tariq. Let's go with Tariq. I think it's Tariq. But thank you very much for supporting the show. We're also now getting $5 an episode from each of Sarah Knowles, Vic Masterson, Jason Seachrist. Seachrist? No. Seachrist. Let's go with Seachrist, because that's how it's spelled. Paul Kroklik. And we are also now getting $5 a month from Shelby Priest. So thank you to all of you for supporting the show. We're also getting a Patreon contribution on top of his $10 a month check subscription. This is from Alexander Lemers. He's now contributing $1 an episode on Patreon, which I'm assuming he's doing for any bonus content in the golf swing free feed. So thank you, Alex. And then last, we're getting $1 an episode from Diana Bell on Patreon. So thank you, Diana. Those regular contributions are so helpful now that I'm hiring more help. We also got some lump sum contributions, though, which are also very helpful and much needed. We got $100 on PayPal from Evangelina Ramirez. Thank you very much. That was the highest of the week. We also got a $40 PayPal bonus from Heather in Missouri, who said, "I got a bonus. You should too." Well, thank you very much. We also got a check for $30.30 from Stephen Hutto of St. Petersburg, Florida. Thank you, Stephen. We got a $30 check from David Breutman. And there is a note here. Lauren says, "Please apologize to David for Lauren not getting the unedited file for 182 to him. She had endless technical difficulties, then wildfires, then Thanksgiving, then hope to have a new system up by now. So yeah, so sorry." Yeah, so David and anyone else who wants the feed, this is what's going on with that. I have the system and I know what it is and I've already paid for it. But then when they went to set it up on Congressional Dish, it isn't going to work with my hosting. So what we're going to do is set up a completely separate website for the members only feed. That is something that I have to do after I release this episode. So that is what the holdup is. But I'm still hoping, and I'm fairly positive that we'll have that up and running by the end of the year. So David, it's coming soon, I promise. We also got $30 on Venmo from Matt Peterborg. So thank you, Matt. And his message said, "Thank you for all your hard work. Love the podcast." Well, thank you very much. I love that you love it. We also got some gift cards. This was cool from Andrew. The gift cards totaled $30. And I would like to let you know that they were spent on buying food for my dog. So Andrew paid for food for Abby. And it is very much appreciated. And the email said, "Greetings and salutations, Jen. This is Andrew, aka that guy who reached out on Facebook and donated some Amazon gift cards. I just wanted to thank you for all the work you do and share what a weird journey I am on with your podcast. I started listening sometime after your Dork Forest appearance and listened pretty much from 163 net neutrality onwards, while also going back and slowly going through the rest starting from the beginning. Yikes. It is weird but enlightening hearing about what happened back in the 113th and 114th Congresses. I get to experience an odd feeling of dread while listening, knowing of what happens with the past elections and in general what major bills get through, but also some hope since you are still doing the podcast and seeing how the last midterm election turned out. I both look forward to seeing how you handle the election of 45 and I'm hesitant to prepare yourself. There was drinking. And I'm hesitant to listen to that part of the podcast. I am almost to the 100th episode and still in the midst of the TPP and TPA drama. While I wouldn't mind a one world government, I am definitely not a fan of big multinational businesses being the ones to bring it about, which your various episodes on free trade agreements have made me aware of. Yeah, that's my whole thing too. I know that we're now at this place where we can communicate and share products with each other all over the world. I'm not necessarily against having rules that govern the entire world. It's just, I don't want these pricks writing them for multinationals and not having a democratic system where we have no say. That's the thing. It matters what the rules are. So really good point there. Back to Andrew's note, he said, I would much rather have a Star Trek future than a Blade Runner 1. I didn't watch either of those things. So I don't get the reference, but I'm sure other people will. Back to his note, one of these days I shall be all caught up in the podcast, but there is only so much congressional dickery I can handle hearing about at one time. I hear you. Until then, I spread the gospel of Congressional Dish as far and wide as I can. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I appreciate your support. We also got a $25 bonus check from David Deere. This is in addition to his $15 a month subscription payment. And the message said, Congressional Dish, December 2018 plus $10. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you too. We also got a $25 check from Angela Gray from St. Paul, Minnesota. And the letter said, Dear Jen, thank you for the wonderful work of Congressional Dish. I am so glad I found your podcast this fall. Please keep those golf swings coming. Cheers from St. Paul, Minnesota. Angela. Thank you, Angela. And I will, because if I don't continue with the golf swings, then we cannot be played in China or India or a bunch of other countries that are smaller than that. But still, there's Americans all over the world, and all those Americans have votes. So I want everyone to be able to access the main part of the show. We also got $25 on PayPal from Lighthearted Works. So thank you very much for having your company help mine. We also got $20 on Zelle from Tara Pileski. And the message said, this podcast has made me significantly smarter about what matters. Thank you. You are very welcome. Thank you for supporting it. We got $20 also on Zelle from Dean Alexander McErnan. I don't know. McErnan. It might not be either of those, but I like the name. Thank you, Dean, is what I'm getting to. Yeah, I appreciate your support. We also got a $10 bonus check from Colton Seals of Jacksonville, Florida. This is in addition to a subscription. So thank you for the bonus. We also got $5 on Venmo from Michael Hawley, who said this was for the last episode on the Democratic Congress /lame duck. Thank you. You're very welcome. We got $5 on Venmo from Connor Sexton, who said, thanks for dishing. You are welcome. We got $5 on Venmo from Matthew Schaefer, who said this is for the net neutrality episode. So that's in the way back machine, but I love knowing why you guys are contributing. So yeah, thanks for telling me I'm contributing. And then we also got a lottery ticket from Bud Johnson. It's a Pick 3 Florida lottery ticket. And so being as we are in California, we're not sure what we're supposed to do with that. Can we turn it in? Was it a winner? Lauren's not sure if that was actually supposed to go to us. Basically, Bud, you confused the shit out of both me and my sister. But we have your lottery ticket. So if you're missing it, Lauren has it. And if it's a winner and you wanted us to cash it, I don't know how. So we need a follow-up, Bud. But thank you either way. And that's it for this episode, guys. So the drought in contributions continues. And I know the holidays are tough, but if you really want this podcast to continue in the 116th Congress, and if you want to hear all these amazing hearings that I think are coming, right now, I can't afford to do more than 24 episodes a year. I need more help, and I need your financial help to make that physical help happen. So yeah, this drought needs to end in order for this podcast to produce any more. I know you guys want me to go back to weekly, but at this point, it is not possible. So yeah, please support the podcast. All of your options are on the support page on congressionaldish.com. Before I wrap up here, we do have some messages from current producers that they would like to share with the community. So first up, we have an email from Patreon subscriber Melissa Waller. She was thanked in episode 183 for her subscription, but we didn't realize that there was an email until now. So Melissa, I'm sorry for this, but her message said, hello, Jen. You can read this if you want to on your thank you portion of your episode. Well, I want to, dear. So let's go. The message then says, I've been listening to Congressional Dish on and off for 2 years now. I started listening to damn near episodes since late 2017. I just wanted to take a second to say I appreciate all you do, and I have learned a lot simply by listening to your podcast. And I may or may not stalk you on Twitter too. Ooh, I love that. My Twitter feed's actually quite good for information. Anything that I think is interesting or is tied into whatever I've been researching, I retweet it on Twitter. And then if you look in my like section, that's kind of what I use as my storage unit for stuff I might come back to. So that's probably my number one. In fact, I know it is. On social media, that's the one that I'm addicted to. But I'm also increasingly addicted to Instagram because I like the story function. I find it so liberating to be able to fuck around and be inappropriate in the story. I make jokes on it all the time and then it just disappears. And I'm having a lot of fun with that. So very few people follow me on Instagram. I don't think I've even told you guys more than maybe once or twice that I have one. But my name is Jen Briney on Instagram. So if you want to follow me there too, that's where I have a lot more fun. And it's not Congress related. It's just me being a goofball. So you might like that one too. But back to Melissa's note. She said, ugh, I got boogers. Melissa didn't say I have boogers. I said I have boogers because I have boogers. That's why I said that. Back to her note. Now that I've had a drink of water, she said, I apologize for the long overdue donation and I hope it helps. It certainly does. I just want to be 100% honest. It probably will fluctuate periodically. Being a single mom isn't the easiest or cheapest job in the world. Hey, I get it. And support the podcast when you can. That's all I ask of anybody. Back to the note. If you ever come up northwest around the Montana area, let me know. We have family in Butte, girl. And I will give you some helpful information about where to stay or go. Glacier Park. Oh, I've been wanting to go to Glacier National Park for so long. And I know I need to get up there before it friggin' melts. Back to her note. Anyways, I hope my little donation helps alleviate some of the holiday pressure. Thanks again, Melissa. You know, I'm actually not feeling any holiday pressure this year. All of the little ones in my life are still little. So it's kind of like, get them a gift. They don't really care. And if they don't think it's cool, I don't really care. So I don't really feel pressure about the holidays. And I'm going for 4 days. I'm going to do 2 days in Orange County at my mom's house and 2 days in LA at my dad's house. And then we'll be back here for New Year's. So it's not a really tough travel season this year. We're not doing anything crazy for the holidays. So that's not what's pressuring me. What you're helping to alleviate is the financial pressure of me trying to figure out how to do the 116th Congress, but still without the help I need to get back to weekly. I don't feel like 24 episodes is going to make any of us as aware as I feel like we should be of what's going on in Congress. And like I said before, I can afford part-time research help right now. I can't afford another full-time me, which is really what I need. So as much as I would like to get more episodes produced, I can't. And so that's what's pressuring me right now. And then also trying to get the members only feed up so that everyone who contributes can get the golf swing free feed. I mean, there's just a lot of going on in the back end right now. And I have a lot of money going out for both the social media and the research help, but I'm not seeing the return on that investment right now. So that's freaking me out. So really the stuff that's giving me pressure in this holiday season is 100% connected to the finances of the podcast. So when you guys contribute money to the podcast, that is the best thing you can do for me right now, because I'm trying to make a really good show and more of them and be more on top of what's going on in Congress. And I'm still not sure quite how to do this, but I get to press that reset button in a couple of months because the lame duck Congress, there's so much happening right now. And there's so little that happens in the beginning of a Congress. So I'm really not going to be done with the 115th, probably until I'm going to guess like March, if history is any guide, because we're going to have government funding. They're also likely to pass a farm bill into law. What else have I seen? There was another thing, but they're doing a bunch of shit during the lame duck Congress, and I know that I need to pay attention to that. So yeah, that's what's keeping me up at night. It's this damn podcast. And the fact that all my profits are going back into the podcast, and I'm personally not really making any money on it again. So yeah, that's my stress. And so you signing up to help on Patreon, yes, it absolutely helps. Thank you so much for doing so. Back to her note, she said, P.S. One of the last thank yous I listened to, someone said that you should try and beat Joe Rogan. Yes, someone did say that, which is preposterous. She said, it's okay not to want to beat him, but I think it would be an awesome treat to hear you on his show. Guys, tell Joe this. I can't invite myself on his podcast. I tried like an asshole years ago and it didn't go anywhere. So I've just left him alone. And so if this podcast ends up on its radar, it's going to be because of people like you that request me as a guest. But I'm not going to reach out to Joe and be like, hey, I have a podcast. Can I come on your show? Like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. It's go gauche and I'm not doing it. And I know that I am terrible at marketing this podcast. It feels dirty whenever I do it. This is why I need you to be my marketing department. So yes, I would love to be on Joe Rogan's podcast. Are you fucking serious? Like, that is every podcaster / comedian fan's dream. I can't make that happen. Only Joe can. So yeah, that's my piece on the Joe Rogan thing. But back to her note, she said podcasts are a great marketing strategy to use. They are to an extent, but I'm just not. So for a while, I invested in my marketing strategy being hiring an agent, going on other podcasts, and the show hasn't been growing. So that strategy is not working. I don't know what's working. Although the stats got reset a year ago, so I actually don't know what the growth of the show was like. I'm still living in the repercussions of that. It's going to feel like this show has stalled until I reach those fake numbers that I had before. So when I thought that we were getting 20,000 downloads per episode, until we get to that, I'm still going to internally feel like I went backwards. And I know that's wrong. And I know my head is telling me that's stupid, that those downloads were never actually real. But in my head, like, I feel like I've gone backwards. So I don't really, when it comes to marketing, I don't waste my time on it. I feel like my time is better spent researching stuff. But what I am doing for marketing is this year we're going to try social media. So I will have stuff for you to share on Twitter and Facebook. I'm not sure if we're going to post stuff on Instagram. I don't know, but we do have these things called audiograms that I think are going to make this show easier to share. And so that's what we're working on for the new year too. So that's my new marketing strategy. But honestly, you guys, the best way, it's not me going on other podcasts, although obviously a Joe Rogan appearance would be huge. But the best way for this podcast to be marketed is through you, is if you tell your friends and you tell your family and you badger them into listening to it. That's how these podcasts grow. It's slow, incremental growth. And it's done because the people who love the show share the show. So yeah, I'm throwing this one back at you. I will absolutely, if invited, fly down to Los Angeles immediately and go on the Joe Rogan experience, but I'm not counting on that. So yeah, what I'm counting on is you for the money and the marketing and everything, because we're all in this together and I'm not a celebrity. And at this point, I probably never will be. So, which is fine. Fame sounds horrible. But back to her note, she said, fun fact, I actually heard you for the first time on the Higher Side Chats with Greg Carlwood. Now that's a show I can go back on every once in a while, and I love doing it. And a lot of people have found the show through Higher Side Chats. I love every time I get to talk to Greg. Back to her note, she said, here I am giving marketing advice when I really have no clue about it. Hey, neither do I, obviously. That is not my expertise, but I do know a little bit about podcasting, and everyone who succeeds, it's because their listeners are advocating it. And so that's what I need for you guys to do. But back to her note, she said, just keep doing what you're doing. It's genuinely been a pleasure. Cheers, Melissa. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate your support so much. And your very kind note. We also got another email from a Patreon subscriber. This is Sean Puzio, and this is another email that we missed because I don't check my emails very often. But here's what Sean said that should have been in episode 185. Sean said, holy balls, I love this podcast. And I decided this is the one that is worth my money. I listen to a lot of podcasts, kind of ridiculous, up to 18 hours a day. My God. I don't even know if I'm awake 18 hours a day. Back to his note, until now, I've supported my favorite creators with good reviews and social media shares only. Hey, that helps. But Congressional Dish is different. And I noticed, I can absolutely feel it when I listen to you. Your passion is contagious and your dedication is inspiring. Keep up the great work and don't sweat the haters. Your emotional outbursts are some of the highlights of the show. It's not dramatic posturing or faux hype. I found more than once that your rants are mirroring the screaming in my head. I'm very happy to have made my first podcast investment in your show. I really look forward to every episode, and I'm enjoying the archive binge more every day. Sean Puzio. Thank you, Sean. And I think that's a great way to look at it. This is an investment. Like, you guys are the investors in this business that I'm pulling out of my ass. But yeah, you have to be my investors. And I've already preached about the whole I can't take ads thing. But yeah, instead of looking to foundations like the National Endowment for Democracy or for advertising, like, you guys can be my investors. And it doesn't have to be a ton of money. it can be a ton of people. It's like the Briney method of funding a podcast. The way he funded his campaign, we can do the same thing with this podcast. And that way this podcast serves you and not them, So yeah, thank you for making an investment in this show. Believe me, I could not do it without you. Believe me. I sound like Trump now. So moving on, we have another email from a Patreon subscriber. This one's from Daniel Moore, and he said, "Hello, Jen. First of all, thank you for such a fantastic podcast. I appreciate your point of view and how worked up you get about things that matter rather than the usual noise everyone else seems to be incessantly screaming about. I feel like I get more value out of your show than just about anything else I consume. This week, even more so than usual. I work at a small engineering company on energy efficiency projects, as well as producing sustainability-related content for our company's website and social media. I came into work last Monday and was deeply engrossed in the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook 2018 report, looking for trends, charts, and statistics to discuss. During my lunch break, I opened my phone and wouldn't you know, my favorite podcast released an episode on what I had been reading all morning. That's amazing. I had a blast listening to you and Joe break down last year's hearing, and it was cathartic to hear you both get as frustrated as I was with what they chose to emphasize from the report. Everyone is so excited about the rise of natural gas, but the report, both last year and this year, seemed to feed into that hype. I'm sure you saw that Qatar left OPEC this week to focus on natural gas production. I did not, actually. I've been completely engrossed in this episode, staying up past midnight and researching stuff. Like the rabbit holes were deep. So no, I didn't see that. That's crazy though. Back to his note. Interesting that happened so shortly after the report was released. Interesting indeed. Anyways, I just want to touch base and offer my appreciation for the show. Your podcast has always been personally enriching, but it was such a pleasant surprise to have an episode so timely and professionally helpful. I'm so glad you got value from that. That's so cool. Back to his note below, I linked an article on the Zinke and the self-sabotage at the Department of the Interior. You've discussed him on the show before, and I know your opinion of him is likely in line with mine. Yeah. You have made me furious with the federal government countless times, so I thought I'd return the favor. And so the article that he links to is a Scientific American article. It's about obviously Zinke and the Department of the Interior. So we've put that in the community suggestions page on congressionaldish.com for anyone who'd like to check that out. Back to his note, he said, keep doing what you're doing. I find your ability to not let the never-ending onslaught of upsetting news get you jaded or disaffected. It does sometimes, but I exercise and have good friends, and I drink and I cry and I have this as an outlet. So no, it affects me. And I think you guys have heard that in some of the episodes that it affects me, but I think I'm figuring out how to deal with it little by little and with 6 years of practice. Back to the note, I sometimes find myself feeling apathetic and hopeless with our situation, but you inspire me to stay informed and engage. I appreciate you making it easier for me to do so. Best, Daniel Moore. It's funny you bring that up because I was just talking to my dad yesterday how about the last 2 years, really the entire 115th Congress, it was really hard mentally for me to keep doing this. And I feel like it was a victory that I just kept the show going. So when you say like, I find myself feeling apathetic and hopeless, that really describes how I was feeling, especially in 2017. But yeah, I just think that we have to keep going. And so that's what I did with the podcast. And I'm feeling a renewed sense of inspiration for it right now. I'm excited for the 116th Congress. I haven't seen, because during the Bush administration, W. Bush administration, the first few years when the Republicans were in control, that's when all the crazy stuff happened, but we didn't know about it because there weren't any investigations. It wasn't until the second half of the W. Bush administration that the Democrats got control of half of Congress and they started having real hearings. Well, we've sped up that time frame here in the Trump years. And so instead of waiting until the second half, oh God, let's hope this is only a one term, but instead of waiting, now it's 2 years. So the last 2 years, there was a limit to how much we could find out about what was really going on because no one was doing investigations because the Republicans are protecting their own party. That's about to change, and I'm excited about it. And that's why I'm kind of changing the show. And I'm not changing it that much, but for the past 6 years, I've been feeling like I need to read all the bills, because that's what nobody does. But now I'm really good at it. So back in 2012, 2013, when I started this, I was so green and I didn't understand how Congress works. I knew nothing. And those of you who listened from the beginning, you know this. I knew nothing. That's why I was reading every bill that passed the House of Representatives for 2 years, because that's how I learned. But now I don't have to do that. I don't have to read every bill, because I can now look at the status of a bill and see very quickly, within seconds, where it is in the process, how likely it is to move forward. If I'm looking for a piece of information, I know exactly where to find it in government funding bills and all the other legislation that kind of gets attached to it. Like, I can search for information now in a way that I couldn't. And so I think I've just kind of graduated from having to focus on specific bills all the time. Now I want to focus on Congress itself, because there's so much more going on there, and there's so much information to learn. And this episode is such a perfect example of that when you watch what's actually going on in Congress, it's so informational. And so that's kind of the switch I want to make. I've been focusing on the bills, and I don't know why I felt the need that I had to be reading all the time, but I think I'm going to do us all a better service if I'm focusing on Congress in general and finding the most interesting stories. And yeah, so I'm excited. I'm really excited again. And yeah. So I guess all I'm trying to say is I do have my ups and downs. The last 2 years, I'm going to say were downs, but I think it's going to turn around right now. And your notes and your support and all of that is what kept me going these last 2 years. So to every single person who did that, thank you. I don't know how many times I can say it, but thank you, because I wouldn't still be doing this without you. I just wouldn't. Yeah, I just wouldn't. So thank you very much. We have 2 more notes. So we have a message from another Patreon subscriber. This is Joshua Zook, who said, feel free to read this message publicly. Okay, dokie. The most recent episode, Global Energy Outlook, was great. It's this type of episode that is the reason I subscribe to your podcast. I know I don't give that much, but it's more money per episode than I give to any other podcast. Thank you for giving anything. Most people don't. The episode Combating Russia is my favorite episode so far, and is the one I recommend to people when I recommend the show. This type of material is the type of analysis of global affairs that I feel I can't get anywhere else, except maybe a Noam Chomsky book. But I have to say you present it in a more entertaining and enthusiastic way. One thing you brought up in this past episode was competition over access to valuable minerals. You should look up what coltan is. It's a mineral that contains rare metals that are necessary for computers and cell phones to function, and it's primarily found in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It is one of the main reasons that the DRC has been in a civil war since 1998, in which millions of people have died while coltan continues to be extracted out of the DRC by multinational corporations. As rare metals become more important for energy production, I think we're going to see more of this, and it's something to keep an eye out for. Joshua, you're absolutely right. And it's funny because I'm recording the thank yous before I'm done with the actual show, because I can't stop researching. I don't know how to do this episode. And I think I'm going to do a segment on the Congo in which I'm going to dive into what you're talking about. But I don't know. I might save that for a second episode, because it is now Friday at 2:26 p.m. And I'm not done researching yet. I'm supposed to be done recording based on my usual schedule. So this episode is just out of control. So that's why it's kind of funny as I read this. I'm like, am I putting this in the main episode? Like, I don't know. Some of you might hear what he just said twice. But thank you for putting that on my radar, because when I read that and then I heard the Congo talked about in this hearing, I kind of had an idea of what was going on there, and my knowledge base started at 0. And so you kind of gave me a heads up, and I really appreciate that. I fucking love it when you guys teach me things that takes the episodes that I produce and then you expand on it with the knowledge that you have. I mean, this really is a team effort. And that's one of the coolest things that happens, is when messages like this show up and they're just like, hey, here's a connection to something that you say. And it's just connecting all these dots. And so it's really cool to have some of it just pop up in my inbox. And so Joshua, awesome bit of information that you gave me, and I appreciate it very much. And then last email of the day, this is from Michael Constantino, and he is a Patreon subscriber, and he said, hey, Jen, at the end of episode 184, you were talking about death a lot and how to donate to science. Cara Santa Maria's podcast, Talk Nerdy, did an episode about this, and it was very interesting, episode 178. Give it a listen to learn more. I'm not sure what he's talking about ended up in the main episode, so that was a conversation that was had between my friend Alexis. So she's the accountant friend, but she did the thank yous with me when we had our marathon get canceled, and we got a little drunk. And so we talked for a long time. And so the full thank yous ended up in the Patreon feed, which the rest of you who contribute will get that to you as soon as we possibly can, hopefully by the end of the year. But in that episode, we talked about how Joe wants me to donate his body to science when he dies. And that irritates me because if my husband dies, if my best friend, the love of my life, dies, I don't want to have to deal with figuring out where to donate his body. Like, I don't want to deal with the process. If he wants this to happen, like, set it up beforehand, at least leave me instructions, do something, because this sounds like a huge pain in the ass. Yeah, so that's what we were talking about. And so that is why Michael is now telling me that Kara, who is a friend of mine, of course Kara did an episode on donating a body to science. That doesn't surprise me in the least, and I would love to listen to it. Maybe I'll even call Kara, have her come on the podcast sometime if you guys actually give a shit about how to donate your body to science, because apparently this is a subject that just keeps recurring on this show for some reason. But yeah, I love Kara and I love Talk Nerdy. I need to reconnect with her sometime soon. But of course she did that. Of course she did that. I love it. Back to his note, he said, I love the show so much. I tell everyone about it and I hope they listen and will donate. Hey, me too. I do not understand why people don't give a little to this wonderful and informative podcast. As soon as it hits my feed, I move it to the top of my podcast list to listen right away. I wish there was more, but I understand how much work goes into each episode and why there can't be. Well, there can be, but we just need more money. That's really all it comes down to. I'm trying to get this back to weekly because I would love to get to the point where I have enough help on the research side that I can bang out these episodes once a week or have like them batched. Or I see a path in which this is possible, but I cannot do it on my own, or I'm not on my own anymore. I do have Matt, but I only have him part-time because of the money. So I need more money. That's all it is. Like, I can do more episodes. I just can't do it with this workload. It's just not possible. But back to his note again, love this podcast so much. You are amazing. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate you so much, along with every single person that has contributed to this podcast, because you are my investors. And without you, this podcast would be dead. And we'd have to donate it to science. All right. So I need to get back to researching this episode so I can record this and hopefully get it out on time. But I would like to thank Daryl, Karen, Mike, and Carrie at Pro Podcast Solutions, who are dealing with the fact that I am going to be late getting them these files once again. I'd like to thank Jess and Sarah at jesshershey.com, my virtual assistants. I'd like to thank Brian, who works for Only Child Imaginations and does the artwork for this show, all the episode level artwork, and he maintains our Congressional Dish store. I'd like to thank Matt, my new research assistant, who, God, I wish you were in Hawaii right now because I need your help, buddy. But having you last week was helpful. I am much further ahead than I would have been at this point if you weren't here, so thank you. I'd like to thank Lauren, who put together the thank yous this week and gave me the very good advice of being in a good mindset when I do the thank yous so that I'm not a horrible bitch monster. So thank you for that advice. I'd like to thank Joe for being okay with the fact that I have not hung out with him for a few days because I've been researching all night. I'd like to thank my dad for his business meetings where he tells me, I'm not sure you could do this thing. And then I talk him into it and I end up being more secure in my decisions. So that is super, super helpful to have those conversations once a week. And again, I would like to thank you, the people who listen to this podcast and support this podcast, because you're the only reason it exists. Otherwise, I would just be sitting here talking to myself, which would be really, really weird. All right. Thank you. One more episode before the end of the year. It's going to be about China. And yeah. Talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite of any in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The
polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but we're not keeping quiet